So it's June 18th, 2024 in Hillsborough, North Carolina, New Goloka. And we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 52, Text 24. Tambudi lakshano darya Rupa Shila Gunashrayam Krishnascha Sadrishim Bharyam Samudvodvam Manodade. Tam, her, that's Rukmini. Buddhi, of intelligence. Lakshana, auspicious bodily markings. So Lakshana, the literal meaning of Lakshana is like symptoms. Odarya, magnanimity. Rupa, beauty. Shila, proper behavior. Guna, and other personal qualities. Ashrayam, repository. Krishna, Lord Krishna. Cha, and. Sadrishim, suitable. Bharyam, wife. Samudvodvam, to marry. Manaha, his mind. Dadhe, made up. BBT translation. Lord Krishna knew that Rukmini possessed intelligence, auspicious bodily markings, magnanimity, beauty, proper behavior, and all other good qualities. Concluding that she would be an ideal wife for him, he made up his mind to marry her. BBT purport. Just as Lord Krishna was described as Sadrisham Patim, an ideal husband for Rukmini, being just like her, Rukmini is described as Sadrishim Bharyam, an ideal wife for Sri Krishna, being just like him. That is natural, since Srimati Rukmini is Lord Krishna's internal potency. Tam Buddhi Lakshan Odarya Rupa Shila Gunashrayam Krishna's Cha Sadrishim Bharyam Samudvodvam Mano Dade. Lord Krishna knew that Rukmini possessed intelligence, auspicious bodily markings, magnanimity, beauty, proper behavior, and all other good qualities. Concluding that she would be an ideal wife for him, he made up his mind to marry her. I want to read Srila Prabhupada's translation from Krishna book. Krishna had also heard of Rukmini, because the last verse was Rukmini had heard about Krishna. So Prabhupada's saying here, Krishna had also heard of Rukmini. She was the reservoir of all transcendental qualities. What's the Sanskrit word here that means reservoir? Ashraya. Yes. Intelligence, auspicious physical features, liberal-mindedness, exquisite beauty, and righteous behavior. Krishna therefore decided that she was fit to be his wife. So we've been hearing a lot about how we should hear about Krishna in order to become attracted to Krishna, in order to develop our relationship with Krishna, how important it is to hear. Maharaj was speaking about that, right? And we had that guest, Gauranga Darshan, he was also speaking about this, how important it is to hear about Krishna. But guess what? It's also important that Krishna hears about us. And what did Srila Bhaktisiddhanta say? Yes, don't try to see God, but act so that God sees you. So it wasn't just that Rukmini was hearing about Krishna, Krishna was also hearing about Rukmini. And Prabhupada often talks about this, how that if we act properly and we're recognized by our immediate authorities, that goes to Krishna. So I thought I'd tell you a very interesting story. It's a story I read many, many years ago, and I went and looked it up again. It's about this lady, I'm not sure how you pronounce her name, Osilo McCarty, and she's passed away now. So she grew up in Mississippi, African-American lady, and her mother and auntie did laundry for a living by hand. They would collect laundry. They had these big metal kettles where they would boil the clothes. They didn't have like a washing machine, and they didn't scrub the clothes. They boiled them. And then they rinsed them out, and then they ironed them. And she took over that business. When her auntie got sick, she dropped out of school at 6th grade, and she took over the laundry business. And that's all she did her entire life. She started out getting paid 10 cents to do a load of laundry. Eventually, that went up to like 25 cents. She never married, never had kids, never owned a car. She had a shopping cart that she would use to walk a mile to the grocery store. She had one black and white TV that got one channel that she practically never watched. So when she got paid every week, at the end of the week, she'd go through the money that she got paid. She'd give a little bit to the local church, and then she would use some for living, and the rest she put in the bank. So she would put about $15 every week in the bank. And after some years, the banker said to her, you could put this in an account that would earn interest. So she said, okay, let's do that. And some years later, he said, you're accumulating some money here. Let's put it in a certificate of deposit account. It will earn more interest. She said, okay, I'll do that. Only one time did she ever withdraw money from that account. One time she withdrew $40. Otherwise, every week she was putting in like $15 or $20 her whole life. And she worked until she was in her 80s. The only book she owned was a Bible. That when it started falling apart, she taped it back together. And when she was in her 80s, she started becoming arthritic and she couldn't work anymore. And then she went to the bank and they said, okay, what do you want to do with your money? And they took out some dimes, and they said, each of these 10 dimes represents a tenth of your money. What would you like to do? She said, well, I'd like to give some to my cousins, and I'd like to give some to the church. And the rest of this, I would like to set up a fund at the University of Mississippi so that poor African-American kids can get a college education. She said, I never had a chance to finish my education. I'd like to do that. And he said, do you realize that that's $150,000? So she had no idea. She was never keeping up with her bank statements or anything. So they started a fund at the University of Mississippi for poor students, especially African-American students, that they could draw from this $150,000, which of course would then be earning more interest. So, the only place she'd ever traveled to in her life was once to Niagara Falls by car. And she was only known in her own little community as somebody who would do washing by hand. Somehow or other, once she gave this money to the University of Mississippi, she became known. Like the word got out that she had given this money and who she was. So President Bill Clinton at the time invited her to Washington, D.C., and he gave her the Presidential Citizens Medal, which is the second most prestigious medal anyone can achieve, civilian medal. The United Nations gave her a reward. Harvard gave her an honorary PhD. And the list goes on and on and on and on and on. We might think, oh, well, I'm doing some simple, humble service. When devotees pass away, we tend to only recognize them if they did some big, bright, and shiny, and well-known service. Right? I mean, every week I have at least one godbrother or godsister passing away. But it doesn't matter how humble your service is, Krishna will notice. And that's what we want. We want Krishna to take notice. So we're going to look here at what did Krishna notice about Rukmini. So he noticed, maybe we could go up to the Sanskrit. So first, the first thing that he mentions is buddhi, her intelligence. And it reminded me of text 10:10 in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says, Tesham satatayuktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam dadami buddhi yogam ta yena mam upayanti te. If you serve me nicely, I will give you intelligence. Which kind of made me think about how all of these qualities, in one sense, are given by Krishna. It's like, Prabhupada talks about if you're worshiping the Ganga, you're offering a palmful of Ganga water to the Ganga. Whatever we have to offer to Krishna, whatever we have is coming from Krishna. Whatever we are, we're part of Krishna. Like my parents would give me an allowance and I'd use that to buy them a birthday present. So this buddhi, this intelligence is coming from Krishna. And the definition of buddhi given in the Bhagavatam is this discriminating power. to be able to see what's good and what's bad, what's right and what's wrong, what should I do. Like in Sattva Gun, it's explained that one knows what is binding, what is liberating, what is to be feared, what is not to be feared. To have proper discrimination, to understand. This is actually two of the first principles of surrender, to accept what's favorable and to reject what's unfavorable. In order to do that, you have to know what's favorable and what's unfavorable. Just like we had this gentleman come this weekend visiting the temple for the first time, and he was telling me about what he's doing in his life and saying, okay, well, is this favorable? Is this unfavorable? What should I do about this? What should I do about that? That's intelligence. And intelligence is compared metaphorically to a chariot driver, that the body's the chariot, the horses are the senses, the reins are the mind, and the passenger is the soul, and the chariot driver is the intelligence. Where are you going to take your body? Where are you, how, and it's supposed to be controlling the mind and the senses. I thought about someone else where Krishna was very attracted by her intelligence, and that's Aditi. So, of course, very different. Here he became Aditi's son, and here he becomes Rukmini's husband. But the same kind of principle, that Aditi had great intelligence. She had great buddhi. And she used her buddhi, her intelligence, to control her mind and her senses, which are described in the Bhagavatam as very difficult to control. Have we all had this experience? Yes? Right? You've already eaten enough. You already feel full. And somebody brings out something that you really like, and your senses go, I want that. And your intelligence says, you're already full. Don't eat it. And the senses go, but I want that. And the mind says, I want it, I want it, I want it. And the intelligence gets dragged around by the mind and the senses, and we eat it, and then we're like, oh, now I ate too much. Has everyone had this experience at least once in your life? Or with talking, we think, I shouldn't say that. I should just keep my mouth shut. But the senses are, I have to say something. That person insulted me. They did something wrong. They said something wrong. I have to stop it. I have to, And the intelligence is going, be quiet. And the senses are going, but I have to say something. And the mind gets dragged by the senses, and then later we regret it, and we have to apologize, and so forth. So it's very difficult to control the mind and the senses. Right? It's often a struggle. And we do this with intelligence. Now, by the way, intelligence is not supposed to control the mind and the senses by repression, because that doesn't work very long. You've all had that experience? Yes? I'm not going to eat that. I'm not going to eat that. I'm not going to say that. I'm not. Does that work? No, it doesn't work. One of the saddest stories in this regard is a couple that got divorced after 10 years. And the man said, I always thought I had a wonderful marriage. And what turned out, what was happening is all those 10 years, the wife had different things that irritated her, and she never said anything. She just suppressed everything. And then one day there was a volcano. You know how an earthquake, like the tension builds up between the tectonic plates, and then one day there's an earthquake. And had she, in a respectful, nonviolent communication way, brought up her problems during those 10 years, then she wouldn't have had that explosion. So it's not that the intelligence just like sits on our mind and our senses. Or any of you who've dealt with little children. You can't just control little children by force. I mean, you can when they're 2 months old. But, if you just like try to hold them, how long can you do that? Right? So what it means that the intelligence controls the mind and the senses is it means it gives them superior engagement. It gives them a superior engagement. If one child's hitting another child with their toy, okay, you can take the toy away and put them in timeout, but that's not a permanent solution or a long-term solution. Here, why don't you play over here with this toy? Why don't you try this over here? To actually engage the mind. And of course, this is the main advantage that we personalists have over the impersonalists. So the impersonalists are just trying to stop the mind and the senses. But we actually can engage them. So this is intelligence, how to engage our mind and our senses in Krishna service. I was just hearing Prabhupada speak about this morning, how to act in such a way that we can remember Krishna all the time. Somehow to engage ourselves in something and that's for us. And yesterday I heard Prabhupada saying that the business of the spiritual master is to engage a disciple according to their individual talents, to engage them according to their nature. When I'm engaged according to my nature, it's very, very easy to engage my mind and my senses in Krishna service, and it's very easy to control my mind and my senses. Like also this gentleman I was talking to on the weekend, he was saying how much he enjoys reading Prabhupada's books. And he says, I want to keep reading them. I don't want to stop reading them. And naturally, I'm losing my interest in other things because I just want to go and read Srila Prabhupada's books. So this is actually intelligence. They're not taught. I mean, I'm sure Rukmini was also very intelligent in the ordinary sense that we think about intelligence. But that's not the kind of intelligence that attracts Krishna. Do you follow what I'm saying? I'm sure as the goddess of fortune, she's supremely intelligent. She was thank you, Mother Krishna Priya, she was very intelligent to figure out a method by which Krishna could kidnap her. Yes. And we find, Prabhupada talks about Devaki like this, that when she was negotiating with Kamsa, how she knew how to be diplomatic and play a political game. So Rukmini also was intelligent like that. But it's not that if you have, only a 50 IQ that Krishna can't be attracted by you. It's not like that. We're not talking about that kind of intelligence. Then Lakshana, auspicious indications. So Lakshana means symptoms, and it can mean actual like markings. When Krishna appeared or when Mahaprabhu appeared, the astrologers saw them and said, oh, they have the physiological indications of being an incarnation of God. Like Krishna has certain markings on his feet. And it's explained by Srila Sanatana Goswami and Srila Jiva Goswami in their commentaries on today's verse that Srimati Rukmini Devi has the same markings as Krishna does, but on the opposite feet. So I was thinking about that, like put your feet together and they match. So these auspicious characteristics. This is why when someone comes along and says, I am an incarnation of God, like Prabhupada sometimes says, we can ask to see their universal form. Of course, they might say, well, you don't have divine eyes. So I'm showing it, you just can't see it. But we could certainly ask to look at their feet. Of course, I've mentioned, I'm sure you remember in Ljubljana, there were this bas relief of Radha and Krishna's feet on the wall. Huge! And I remember saying something to the temple president, Ananta Prabhu. I said, it's kind of odd maybe for brand new people to Krishna consciousness to come in our temple and see these huge feet up on the wall. You may think we're a little peculiar. I don't think they're there anymore. But one time in London, I was doing a home program, and I was informed beforehand that a number of the people there were followers of this bogus somebody who claims to be God. So I didn't talk about that during my talk. Actually, I asked people to anonymously write their biggest doubts and questions and pass them up, and then I spoke about them. But at the end of the talk, someone says, how can you recognize an incarnation of God? And knowing this particular person that a bunch of them were into, I said, well, for one thing, he's going to be very beautiful. Silence. And I was told later that a lot of them realized that he wasn't actually God. How people can think that they're God. I mean, I don't know, look in the mirror. But Lakshana also means, in addition to that, it means any kind of symptoms. There are symptoms. Like this was another thing that this Travis was asking me. How can I tell who's a devotee? He said, I'm reading that I should hear from the right people. How do I tell? And I did say to him, well, it is possible to be fooled. You can think that someone is not a devotee when they are. Like King Rahugana didn't recognize Jadabharata. And he says, oh, sometimes the great souls are in disguise. So sometimes we may not recognize a saintly person. We may think they're ordinary, and sometimes a person may present themselves as saintly and actually not be, and even the cowherd boys get fooled by demons like Vyomasura and Pralambasura, and even Mother Yasoda and Mother Rohini get fooled by Putana. I said, so, sometimes people appear saintly and they're not, and sometimes people appear ordinary and they're actually saintly. But there are symptoms given. So one place where there's symptoms asked and given is in the 2nd chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where Arjuna says, how do I know somebody who's a sadhu? How do they speak? What is their language? How do they sit? How do they walk? He asks again in the 14th chapter, what are the symptoms of one who's transcended the modes of nature? I wanted in this case to look at the qualities of a devotee, which are the lakshana, the symptoms of a devotee. So you can't tell who's a devotee by looking at the lines on their hands and feet, by the way. And in fact, Srila Rupa Goswami warns us about that kind of trying to figure out who's a devotee in Nectar of Instruction, text 5. He said, you cannot tell who's a devotee if somebody has a bad complexion or a deformed body or a diseased body. That's not, you can't look at those sort of physiological characteristics. But we can look at you can look at those characteristics to know who's God and who's the goddess of fortune, but not who's a devotee. So who's a devotee, we want to look at these qualities. So Kripalu, and the 3 definitions given in Prabhupada's books are merciful, kind to everyone, unable to tolerate the suffering of others. Akrita droha, not defiant, humble, does not make anyone an enemy, does not quarrel with anyone, peaceful, never injuring others, which we'll talk about in a minute. Satyasara, truthful, fixed in the absolute truth, attaining strength and meaning in life from the truth. Sama, equal to all, equal in happiness and distress, mental equilibrium. Nirdosha, faultless. That doesn't mean they never put their shoes on the wrong feet by mistake, by the way. And Prabhupada says the liberated souls don't make mistakes. In Ishopanishad, Mantra 18, purport, he defines mistakes as accidental sins. But as far as ordinary things, Prabhupada wrote in a letter to Atreya Rishi, even Krishna sees Radharani and tries to milk a bull instead of a cow. And the gopis are running to Krishna and they put their clothes on upside down. When I first read that when I was in college, that they put the lower portion of their garments on the upper portion, and I couldn't wrap my head around it. Like, how do you put a blouse on your legs? But once I started wearing a sari has this piece at the top, And if you tuck that in at the bottom, you're putting it in upside down. And then it's like, So that kind of falseness. Like Prabhupada would sometimes, he was talking about how we had New Vrindavan at West Virginia, and sometimes he called it New Virginia. So we don't mean that kind of fault. Mridu, very mild, without a harsh mentality. Akinchana, without material possessions. Now that doesn't mean that you're walking around naked. It means that you don't have a sense of ownership. Never professing to possess anything in this material world, non-possessive. Sarva upakrata, working for the welfare of everyone, benefactor, well-wisher, dedicates his time to work for the welfare of others. Shanta, peaceful, satisfied, controlling the mind, which relates to intelligence. Krishna Eka Sharana, exclusively surrendered to Krishna, accepting Krishna as the only shelter. I don't have time to read all of these, there's 4 to 6 different translations in different parts of Srila Prabhupada's books where these are referred to. They're referred to in Madhya Lila chapter 22. They're referred to in Bhagavatam 3:15. They're referred to in Bhagavatam 4:20. They're referred to in the 11th canto. They're referred to in Bhagavatam 2nd canto. So there's different places where these 26 qualities are referred to, and Srila Prabhupada doesn't always translate them exactly the same way. Akama, desirelessness, free from material hankering, or undisturbed by material desires. Anila, indifferent to material acquisitions, simple. Vijita Sat Guna, completely controlling the 6 bad qualities, lust, anger, greed, etc. Self-controlled. Mitabuk, eating only as much as required, a balanced eater. Apramata, without inebriation, not influenced by the Lord's illusory energy, sane. Now that doesn't mean, again, if you have a mental illness, that doesn't mean you're disqualified from being a devotee. Maitra, friendly, never cheating anyone, and thus a true friend. Manada, respectful, mannerly, offers honor to others. Amani, without false prestige, humble. Gambira, grave. Karuna, compassionate, merciful, sympathetic. Kavi, poetic or learned. Daksha, expert. Prabhupada actually talks about this quality in regard to brahmachari training and Gurukula in Mumbai in 1976. And he says the devotee should not be callous to material expertise. He said that all of the devotees should be trained to know everything, to know something of everything and everything of something. And he talked about the brahmacharis and the Gurukul students. They should know something of everything and everything of something, and that is daksha. Moni, silent, or silent in nonsense. Suchi, clean, or internally and externally clean. Vadanya, magnanimous, charitable. Stira, fixed in devotional service, being steady, remaining steady in one prescribed duty. So those are different, those are the lakshana of the devotee. What are their characteristics of the devotee? Okay, then we want to go to Audarya. So Audarya is often translated as compassionate or magnanimous, and I was trying to figure out why Mahaprabhu is often called the Audarya incarnation, and it comes from one commentary in the Chaitanya Bhagavat that Mahaprabhu is considered the incarnation of Audarya. Now, according to various Vedic literatures, that females have 10 naturally inherent characteristics, and men have 8, and in each case, Audarya is there. This magnanimity, that these are natural characteristics in our psychology. However, of course, if we're trained badly, we may not display them. You follow? Modern society, if you have the wrong family or the wrong society, you may not be trained to be very merciful. So Audarya, or compassion, is very interesting translations. It can be translated as generosity. And I was thinking in this regard, two things. First of all, the Kshatriyas are particularly described as being very generous. It's the word there used is dana. They give a lot in charity. And of course, Rukmini and Krishna are ostensibly appearing in this world as Kshatriyas. Now it's interesting, in society, the majority of charity is given by Vaishyas because they have the most money. They collect the most money, so they're the biggest givers of charity. I mean, one of the occupations of a Brahmana is to give charity, and one occupation is to collect charity. People think fundraising is a Vaishya activity. It's not. It's a Brahminical occupation. So fundraising and then giving that in charity is Brahminical. But Brahmanas don't usually amass a lot of money for themselves. Why? Because they turn around and give it in charity. But the Vaishyas are supposed to amass money, and the Vaishyas are never supposed to give everything away. Never. They're always supposed to keep something in reserve. Like you can't give away all the grain you harvest. You have to keep seeds for the next harvest. You can't just cover your expenses. You have to make a profit. Vaishyas have to be profit-minded. It's their dharma. Otherwise, they're not going to have sustainable, regenerative business and agriculture. But the Kshatriyas aren't supposed to have a profit-minded mentality at all. Second to collecting wealth from the Vaishyas are the Kshatriyas. The Kshatriyas collect a lot of wealth in taxes and fees, and as Maharaj was talking about the other day, in booty. That's not Buddhi, B-U-D-D-H-I. That's B-O-O-T-Y, an English word, not a Sanskrit word. So they have these collections, but when there's need, they exhaust their treasury. They don't keep some in reserve. That the Vaishyas have to keep some in reserve, but the Kshatriyas aren't supposed to do that. If there's some kind of famine or there's some kind of emergency, they're supposed to give away everything, not only in the country's treasury, but in their personal treasury. And we have many examples like this in our Shastra. So this is extreme charity. Actually, only the Kshatriyas are supposed to do this kind of extreme. They have to have this very important for Kshatriya, because the Kshatriya is dealing with huge amounts of wealth, but it's not theirs. They're a trustee for the people's wealth. And actually in the Shastra it often says that the earth belongs to the Brahmanas, and the Kshatriyas consider that they're a trustee for the wealth of the Brahmanas. So all devotees, however, and all human beings are supposed to be charitable. Krishna says this in the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, that even great souls should engage in yajna and dana and tapa. Everyone should be charitable. If we're not charitable, we become envious. I want to have more than anybody else. Prabhupada told Yamuna, if you don't share your knowledge, you'll become envious. And charitable isn't just money. Charitable is our time, our expertise, our knowledge, our talents. We should share them. So this is Audarya. Audarya is also a sense of courteous bearing, a kind of nobility of bearing. We saw this very much in Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada had this very noble bearing about him. Each of his gestures, the way he walked, the way he moved, the way he talked, he had this air of kind of nobility about him. So this munificence, and charity and nobility of bearing, this kind of a dignity, a natural dignity and elegance. Yes? So that is also Audarya. Then Rupa, which is described here as her beauty. So I might have mentioned this the other day. So I was, one devotee called and asked me for some help with some philosophical things, and I was talking to her. She was very upset about some of the statements in Srila Prabhupada's books about women. And one of the statements that upset her the most was Krishna's statement in 931 about Papa Yoni. And she was like, why is Krishna saying women are Papa Yoni? And I said, do you know that Srila Prabhupada used that verse consistently and frequently to say how Krishna consciousness is available to everyone? He didn't use this verse in a discriminatory way. He used this verse to say, just see, it doesn't matter what kind of body or birth or circumstances you have. Everybody is equally eligible for Krishna consciousness. I said, this isn't a put-down verse. This is a magnanimous verse. Now, all the time I was talking to her, I was noticing that on an ordinary level of Rupa, she had a very ordinary appearance. If you want to look at like her facial features and stuff, technical attractiveness, I would definitely have put her in the extremely ordinary quality. And somehow when she started meditating on that this verse was actually a magnanimous verse, glorifying people who might otherwise be considered lower, all of a sudden she looked so beautiful that I thought, my God, she could be on a magazine cover. And it was boom. It just all of a sudden radiance was coming from her. I have this experience also. I did one last night with a devotee in Australia. They've been doing a lot of consultations the last year about people's proper situation in the Varnas. What is their proper field of work? And it's one of the symptoms that I look for. Like people, well, should I do this work? Should I do that work? And once they realize where they belong and what are their talents, they just start glowing. I was looking at this devotee, I said, it's like a light bulb went off, and you're just effulgent. It's one of the symptoms that I look for. He was like, am I in the field of artistry or the field of ideas? And once he realized he was naturally in the field of artistry, he just started glowing. So and Prabhupada talks about the devotees becoming beautiful like this. It's not necessarily, that our nose gets shorter or our eyes get wider or, we lose the extra weight around our thighs or something. It's not talking about that kind of beauty. Our hair looks like somebody in a commercial, but we'll be glowing. And whoever sees us will think, wow, what a beautiful person. And then we have Shila. Now this is not Shila. Shila means a stone, but Shila means good behavior. So we talked about having good qualities, but this is also good behavior. Now, this word in Sanskrit doesn't mean a good moral compass. It doesn't mean I'm doing the right thing out of obligation. but it means my internal ethical compass. That someone who has Shila, they create an atmosphere of trust around them. People feel secure. You feel, oh, this is a person who is not a threat. This is not a threat. They're not a threat to someone else's life. They're not a threat to someone else's property. They're not a threat to someone else's rights. They're not a threat to someone else's well-being. That's what Shila means. So it's like one of the qualities, but very particular. Now, this is an interesting quality for a Kshatriya lady, because the Kshatriyas actually did harm others. But they harmed criminals in order to protect the good citizens. They were the people who created an atmosphere of safety in society. So we should feel safe. Other people should feel safe around us. They should feel safe when they reveal their confidences. They should feel safe when we see their faults, that we don't intend any harm for them. That doesn't mean we never correct anybody if that's our business. And if it's not our business to correct someone, then we go to their authority and ask them to do it. It's not that we go up to everybody and correct them all the time. But people should have some confidence that even if that has to be done, that we don't mean them any harm. Now, in closing, I wanted to just refer to Prahlad Maharaj in 799, where he lists a lot of these same qualities and says, one cannot satisfy the Lord by any of these qualities if there's no devotion. So we can be intelligent, we can have all these wonderful symptoms, we can have Audarya, we can be glowing, we can have a good moral compass, but if we have no devotion, if we have no love, then Krishna is not going to be attracted. But if you add love to it, then it's like adding 1 to all the zeros. And Krishna will hear about us. He'll hear about us somehow or other, even if we're just some washer lady washing clothes in a pot by hand in Mississippi. He'll hear about us. Yes. And he will say, yes, I choose you to be my associate. Oh, thank you very much. Sorry that you're all disappointed that Maharaj didn't give the class today. I'm a very poor stand-in. But I think he's there, but he's getting ready to travel, so he didn't have time to give class today. So my apologies for the class that's vastly inferior to anything that he would have said. And thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.